A millionaire had only 2 days to live. As his funeral began, the girl appeared with something incredible: the assault on room 402. Ice-cold water trickled down Arthur Sterling's chin, soaking his hospital gown and drowning his already artificial breathing. "Swallow it, please, you have to swallow it," a child's voice, broken by panic, cried out. It wasn't a doctor, it wasn't a nurse, it was a girl, no more than 11 years old. Her blonde hair was tangled in dirty knots, her face smudged with soot and grime from the streets, and she wore a worn-out brown t-shirt that looked on the verge of disintegrating. Her trembling, dirt-covered hands clutched a deformed plastic bottle, desperately pouring the liquid directly into the unconscious magnate's mouth. The water splashed the vital signs monitors, stained the white sheets, and seeped around the oxygen tube connected to Arthur's nose. Chaos erupted in the intensive care unit in less than 3 seconds. What the hell does this mean? "Get her out of here!" Robert Thorne's roar bounced off the glass walls. His impeccable $5,000 custom-tailored suit couldn't hide the pulsing vein in his neck. His usually calculating face was disfigured by absolute horror. Beside him, Victoria Sterling let out a shriek, clutching her head and crumpling the expensive silk scarf covering her hair. "She's killing my brother!" Gods, for God's sake," she screamed, stumbling backward on her designer heels, colliding with the other 2 executives who watched the scene, paralyzed by disbelief. The girl was unfazed by the shouts. Her immense, reddened eyes were fixed on Arthur's pale, cadaverous face. "Wake up, you promised me. Drink the water," the little girl sobbed, pushing the spout of the plastic bottle between the millionaire's parched lips. The machines beside the bed began to emit a deafening cacophony. Red lights flashed furiously. The heart monitor, which until moments ago had displayed a weak but steady rhythm, began to show erratic spikes. Arthur Sterling, the man who controlled half of Toronto's steel industries, began to convulse on the bed. His hands clutched the sheets with superhuman strength. His eyes snapped open, wide and white, searching for air that wouldn't reach his lungs. "He's drowning," Robert roared, finally lunging forward. He grabbed the girl's arm with brutal force, his fingers digging into her fragile skin. "Let go, you street rat." "No, let me go. He has to drink it all." Lily shrieked, kicking the air, writhing like a trapped animal. Despite Robert's violent pull, the girl clung to the bed rail with one hand, while with the other, she continued trying to empty the bottle. 2 security guards burst into the room, knocking over a medicine cart in their haste. Syringes, gauze, and vials flew across the gleaming floor. "Get her out of here. Throw her onto the street. Call the police." Victoria spat, her face red with rage and panic, pointing at the girl as if she were a demon. "Look what she's done to him." The guards grabbed Lily by the waist and shoulders, lifting her. The girl let out a heartbreaking scream that chilled everyone in the room. The bottle! Don't let it fall," she cried, reaching out her hand towards the bed as she was dragged towards the door. The deformed plastic container slipped from her dirty fingers. It fell in slow motion, bouncing off the edge of the bed and spilling the last drops of that transparent liquid onto the immaculate hospital tiles. At that very instant, Arthur Sterling's body stopped convulsing. He collapsed heavily onto the mattress. The erratic beeping of the heart monitor turned into a long, sharp, continuous hum. A bright green straight line crossed the screen. The silence in room 402 was absolute, broken only by the sound of death on the monitor and Lily's distant screams as she fought with the guards in the hallway. Victoria covered her mouth with both hands, feigning a choke sob, but over her hands, her eyes quickly met Robert's. Robert Thorne adjusted his shirt cuffs, let out an imperceptible sigh, and looked at his brother-in-law's lifeless body. There were no tears on his face, only the cold gleam of someone who had just won the lottery. "It's over," Robert murmured, his voice grave, making sure to sound devastated. "The giant has fallen." What neither of the 2 vultures noticed, blinded by greed and the sound of the monitor at 0, was that beneath the soaked sheet, Arthur Sterling's fingers had closed into a fist. The 48-hour sentence. 2 days earlier, the air conditioning in the VIP suite of Mount Sinai Hospital was at freezer temperature, but Robert Thorne was sweating, pacing back and forth, tapping the tip of his designer shoes against the marble, while Victoria checked her mobile phone with an indifference that bordered on sociopathic. The mahogany door opened, and Dr. Peterson entered. His white coat was impeccable, but his face reflected the weight of a condemnation. He carried a metallic folder in his hands. He closed the door behind him and looked at the 2 relatives. "I won't beat around the bush," the doctor said, his voice cutting the silence like a knife. The collapse at the shareholders' meeting was not due to stress. Toxicology analyses and scans are conclusive. Arthur has fulminant liver and kidney failure. It's aggressive. I've never seen anything progress with this speed. Victoria blocked her phone screen and placed it on the glass table. She quickly adopted a rehearsed expression of consternation. "What are you saying, doctor?" she asked, placing a hand on her diamond-adorned chest. "My brother is an oak. He exercises. He takes care of himself. This is impossible. There must be a treatment. I demand you bring the best specialists from Europe. Money is no object." Dr. Peterson shook his head slowly. "There's no time for transfers, Mrs. Sterling. Arthur's organs are shutting down in a cascade. His heart is making a massive effort to pump poisoned blood. We've induced him into a coma to spare him the pain, but the damage is irreversible." Robert stopped dead. He approached the doctor, invading his personal space. His eyes were two calculating black pits. "Give me numbers, Peterson. I hate medical poetry. How much time does my brother-in-law have left?" The doctor held his gaze. 48 hours maximum. "And I'm being optimistic. I deeply regret it." The doctor nodded slightly and left the room, leaving them alone with the death sentence floating in the cold air. The door clicked softly as it closed. Victoria and Robert remained silent for 10 seconds, listening to the doctor's footsteps fade down the hallway. Suddenly, Victoria's consternated posture evaporated. She sighed deeply, sank onto the white leather sofa, and crossed her legs, revealing the red soles of her shoes. 48 hours, she murmured, with a half-smile forming on her crimson-painted lips. "My God, Robert. Finally. I thought this moment would never come. The miserable man was going to outlive us first." Robert didn't smile. His face was a mask of pure strategic tension. He walked to the large window overlooking the Toronto skyline. In the distance, the chimneys of Arthur's steel foundries spewed smoke into the gray sky of the Empire. "Don't celebrate yet, Victoria," he growled, pulling his phone from his inner jacket pocket. "Arthur is dying, yes, but the board transition isn't ready. If he dies today, shares will plummet at dawn. I need time to freeze the investment accounts before minority shareholders panic." "Relax, you're the vice president. I'm his only living blood relative. Everything passes to us by default. He has no wife, no children, no one but his adored and patient family," she said, letting out a dry, humorless laugh. "I'm going to sell that Rosedale mansion as soon as we finish the 9-day mourning period. I always hated the outdated furniture he chose." Robert was about to reply when his phone vibrated in his hand. An incoming call. "Private number," he answered, bringing the device to his ear while frowning at Victoria. "Thorne speaking." The voice on the other end of the line was hoarse, formal, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was Mr. Davies, Arthur Sterling's personal notary and legal shadow for the past 3 decades. "Mr. Thorne, I regret Mr. Sterling's medical situation. However, my legal obligation requires me to communicate immediately. Davies, this isn't the time. We're dealing with a family tragedy." "Call next week," Robert replied, ready to hang up. "I'm afraid it must be now, Mr. Thorne," the lawyer insisted, raising his voice an octave to assert himself, especially considering what happened yesterday afternoon. Robert froze, a shiver running down his spine. "What happened yesterday afternoon?" Arthur was locked in his office. Victoria noticed the change in Robert's voice and straightened up on the sofa, alert as a snake. "Yesterday at 6 p.m., hours before his collapse, Mr. Sterling summoned me to his private office," the notary explained, his words falling like heavy stones. "He executed a complete and irrevocable modification to his will. He annulled the previous version." The phone almost slipped from Robert's sweaty hand. "What modification are you talking about?" he hissed, moving away from Victoria by instinct, lowering his voice. "I'm the executor. I'm the principal heir to the operational shares. He promised me." "You are no longer the executor, Mr. Thorne, nor is Mrs. Sterling the universal heir." The notary's voice was icy, impeccable. "Mr. Sterling left extremely specific instructions. 95% of his assets, bank accounts, properties, and the majority stake in Sterling Iron and Steel are now in a blind trust." "That's illegal. He's mentally incapacitated. I'll challenge it in court before his body is cold," Robert yelled, completely losing his temper, slamming his fist against the window glass. Victoria jumped to her feet, pale as paper. "Who is the beneficiary, Davies?" Robert asked, spitting the words. "Tell me, what name did that miserable old man put on the paper?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. The rustling of paper being unfolded. "That's the detail, Mr. Thorne. There is no name." "Don't play with me," Robert roared. "I'll read you verbatim. Clause 7. Drafted and signed by your brother-in-law. My entire fortune and absolute control of my legacy shall be delivered solely to the person who possesses the physical proof of the promise I made on the Bloor Viaduct 15 years ago. Whoever presents that proof at my funeral will be my sole and rightful heir. If no one does, the empire will be liquidated and the money donated to charity." The silence in the VIP suite was deafening. "What proof? What damned bridge is he talking about?" Robert whispered, feeling the floor disappear beneath his feet. "I don't have that information, sir. My duty is only to read the will at the end of the burial and verify the proof if someone appears with it. Good afternoon." The call cut off. Robert slowly lowered the phone and looked at Victoria. The high society mask had completely vanished from her face, leaving only the terror of someone about to lose everything. "What is it, Robert? What did he tell you?" she demanded, grabbing his arm with sharp nails. "Arthur cut us out of the will," he murmured, his eyes bloodshot, staring into space. "He changed everything yesterday. He's going to give the empire to a stranger, to someone who has proof." Victoria stumbled backward, bumping into the glass table. No, he can't do this. We've waited too long. I sacrificed my life for this family." Her voice rose, becoming a hysterical shriek. "He must be drugged. The doctors said his brain is intoxicated." "Shut up," Robert yelled, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her violently. "Listen to me, Victoria. No one can know this. No one. We have less than 48 hours before he dies, and the funeral arrives." Robert's eyes darkened with lethal determination. The refined businessman had vanished, giving way to the predator. "I don't know what that proof is. I don't know who the hell Arthur is waiting for," he hissed, bringing his face close to hers. "But whoever tries to approach your brother's coffin, we're going to destroy them. No one will steal this company from us, even if I have to stain the church floor with blood." While Robert Thorne declared war inside the cold private hospital, 15 kilometers away, under the scorching sun of a traffic light in downtown Toronto, a blonde girl with a dirty face cleaned a car windshield. In her ragged pant pocket, she kept a deformed plastic bottle, and in her mind, only one address resonated: Mount Sinai Hospital, room 402. The clock had begun to tick. The locked will. The cognac glass shattered against the mahogany-paneled wall, splashing the Persian tapestry with a liquid that cost more than any sterling iron and steel employee's annual salary. "It has to be here. Search thoroughly," Robert Thorne roared, kicking the glass fragments with the tip of his designer shoe. Arthur Sterling's private study, in the heart of his impenetrable Rosedale mansion, looked as if it had been ravaged by a hurricane. Heavy corporate law and international finance books lay on the floor with pages torn out. The drawers of the solid oak desk had been violently emptied. Victoria Sterling, her makeup streaked with sweat and despair, threw bundles of documents, bank files, and contracts onto the floor. Her trembling hands, adorned with diamond rings, blindly searched through the papers. "There's nothing, Robert, nothing. Just quarterly reports, board minutes. No mention of a bridge or a promise." She shrieked, falling to her knees among the scattered documents, tearing at the neck of her silk blouse. "He's going to leave us on the street. Us. His own blood." Robert breathed with difficulty. His dark, sunken eyes scanned the library walls, desperately searching for a hidden safe, a false panel, anything that might house the secret Arthur had kept for 15 years. The clock was ticking 36 hours since the diagnosis. Arthur remained in a coma at the hospital, and time was slipping away like sand through his fingers. He grabbed a heavy bronze statue from the desk, a wild bull, the symbol of a bull market, and walked towards a locked metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room. "If that miserable old man thinks I'm going to let some bastard or past mistress claim my seat on the board, he's gravely mistaken," Robert hissed, raising the statue. With a brutal blow, he smashed the lock on the filing cabinet. The metal creaked and gave way. Robert pulled the drawer so hard he almost ripped it from its rails. Inside, there were no gold bars, no checkbooks, no bearer bonds. Only an old shoebox tied with a black leather cord. Victoria rose from the floor, almost stumbling, pushing Robert to see inside the drawer. "What is it? Open it quickly," she demanded, her voice shrill with hysteria. Robert broke the cord with a sharp tug and opened the box. Silence fell heavily on the luxurious study. Both stared at the contents, their pulses throbbing at their temples. There was no obvious physical proof mentioned in the will. There was no valuable object. There were only letters, dozens of yellowed, unopened envelopes, with no sender, all bearing the same handwritten address in Arthur's impeccable calligraphy: Sarah Chen, Regent Park. And beneath the letters, a time-worn photograph. Robert took it with rigid fingers. In the image, a much younger Arthur Sterling, without tailored suits, smiled genuinely. Beside him, embracing him, was a woman with jet black hair, dressed in humble clothes but with a fiery gaze. Behind them, the unmistakable structure of Toronto's Bloor Viaduct. Freshly built. "Sarah Chen," Victoria whispered, feeling the air leave her lungs. "I remember her. She was a nobody, a factory worker. My father threw her out years ago when he found out Arthur wanted to marry her. He hated her for it. He swore he'd forgotten her." Robert crumpled the photograph in his fist, crushing the smiling faces into a useless ball of paper. His jaw tightened with cold, calculating fury. He never forgot her, and the proof of that promise, she has it, or someone of her filthy blood. Robert spat, throwing the paper ball into the corner of the room. "The will states someone will show up at the funeral. That means they know Arthur is dying, or they're about to find out." He turned, walked to the phone on the shattered desk, and dialed a number ferociously. He waited 2 rings before someone answered on the other end. "Miller," Robert barked, addressing the head of Sterling Iron and Steel Security, a former military man known for his utter lack of scruples. "I want an absolute lockdown at Mount Sinai Hospital right this instant." "Mr. Thorne, we already have 2 guards in the hallway on the 4th floor. The hoarse voice on the other end began to reply. "I said an absolute lockdown, you idiot," Robert yelled, slamming his fist on the table. "I want men at the main entrances, in the loading area, on the emergency stairs, and in the ventilation ducts. If necessary, no one but me, Victoria, or the medical team enters Arthur's floor. If you see a woman named Sarah Chen, or anyone who doesn't look like they can afford that hospital, kick them out. If they resist, break their legs and dump them on the Highway 401. Was I clear?" "Crystal clear, sir. Reinforcing security right now. No one will approach room 402. Robert hung up the phone, breathing heavily. He looked at Victoria, whose eyes reflected the same murderous panic as his own. "No one is going to steal this company from the Sterling family," he declared, adjusting the cuffs of his wrinkled shirt. "The old man will die alone in that bed, and when we bury him, the will won't mean anything because no one will have delivered his stupid proof. We are the owners of Toronto." What the security machinery and millions of Robert Thorne couldn't calculate was that the most lethal danger to his steel empire didn't come in the form of a team of lawyers or a vengeful mistress. It came in the form of worn-out sneakers running on the scorching asphalt of the city, the girl at the traffic light. The girl at the traffic light. The heat on Queen Street was stifling, reflecting off the concrete and distorting the air over the hoods of cars stopped in midday traffic. The roar of engines, impatient honking, and dense exhaust smoke created an urban hell. Lily ran through the sea of metal. She weighed no more than 30 kilograms. Her brown t-shirt hung loosely over her cut-off denim shorts, stained with engine grease and dry mud. Her sneakers had no laces, and the left one had a hole so large in the sole that she felt the pavement burn the sole of her foot with every step. "Windshield wash, mister. I'll make it shine," she shouted, her voice hoarse with dust, spraying soapy water onto the windshield of a late-model Mercedes-Benz SUV. The driver, a suited man talking on his cell phone, honked furiously and turned on his wipers at maximum speed, making a disgusted gesture with his hand to shoo her away. Lily jumped back before the SUV accelerated, almost running over her feet. She didn't care. She had no time to be offended, no time for anything. She retreated to the median strip of the avenue, dodging a motorcycle that brushed her shoulder. She dropped to her knees on the dry earth, under the only scraggly tree in the area. Her breathing was ragged. Her chest rose and fell violently. She reached her dirty, trembling hand into the deep pocket of her shorts. Her fingers closed around the crunchy plastic. She pulled out the bottle. It was an old, deformed container, without a label. The cap was scratched and poorly screwed on. Inside, the transparent liquid sloshed. To the naked eye, it was just water, tap water, or perhaps from some public fountain. But for Lily, it was the most valuable object in the universe. She pressed it against her chest, feeling the wild beats of her own heart against the plastic. "Almost there, I promise. Almost there," she murmured to the bottle with a feverish intensity in her large reddened eyes. Suddenly, a shadow covered her. "Give me that, urchin. I'm dying of thirst," a hoarse voice growled behind her. Lily spun on her knees. It was Patch, a huge, violent vagrant who controlled that intersection, known for stealing coins from the kids working the traffic lights. His yellowish eyes were fixed on the plastic bottle. He extended a huge hand, covered in scabs and grime, towards the girl. Lily didn't hesitate for a microsecond. She didn't cry, she didn't beg. She tucked the bottle under her t-shirt, pressed it against her abdomen, and jumped to her feet, backing towards the flow of cars. "It's not for you. Don't touch it," she yelled, baring her teeth like a cornered animal. "I told you to give it to me, rat," the man growled, heavily lunging at her. Lily turned and ran. She plunged headfirst into the avenue, passing exactly 5 centimeters from the bumper of a cargo truck that braked suddenly, making its air brakes shriek. The driver yelled insults out the window, but Lily was already on the other side, leaping over the metal barrier and falling onto the hard ground of the side street. She scraped her elbows and knees. Fresh blood welled from her dirty skin, mixing with the dust, but her hands, her small, bruised hands, never let go of the bottle hidden under her shirt. It was intact, not a single drop spilled. She got up limping, ignoring the burning in her legs. She looked at the huge digital clock, high on a nearby corporate building. It was a few minutes before 1 p.m. She had to get there. It was today. She only had today. She ran towards the King Station subway. She descended the concrete stairs 2 at a time. Upon reaching the turnstiles, she saw uniformed security guards checking bags. Lily knew that if they saw her covered in dirt, blood, and without a cent in her pockets, they would kick her out onto the street. She crouched behind a broken ticket vending machine. She waited. Her gaze was like a laser, studying the guards' movements, the flow of suited people and students swiping their cards. When a large group of office workers passed by, laughing and pushing each other, Lily slid along the ground, literally crawling under the arm of the turnstile, in the guard's blind spot. She ran to the platform and slipped inside the subway car, just before the orange doors hissed shut. The interior of the car was air-conditioned. The contrast of the cold made her shiver. Passengers from the city's affluent area, dressed in immaculate clothes, immediately moved away from her. A woman hugged her designer purse to her chest, looking at her with a mixture of pity and deep disdain. A man in a suit wrinkled his nose at the smell of hot asphalt and sweat emanating from the girl. Lily didn't see the disdain. She didn't care about the blood dripping down her leg. She walked to the darkest corner of the car, sat on the metal floor, pulled her knees to her chest, and took out the bottle again. She watched the water move slowly inside the deformed plastic. A single tear, heavy and laden with a maturity no child should possess, rolled down her dirty cheek, leaving a clean furrow on her skin. "Hang on, please, stubborn old man, hang on," she whispered, closing her eyes so tightly it hurt. Half an hour later, the subway doors opened at the Bay Station, the most exclusive and guarded area of Toronto. Lily emerged to the surface, and the imposing Mount Sinai Hospital rose before her. It was an intimidating structure of tempered glass, stainless steel, and white marble, surrounded by perfectly pruned palm trees and luxury vehicles parked in the main bay. She walked towards the emergency entrance. From the sidewalk across the street, she noticed something was wrong. There wasn't the usual movement of paramedics and nurses asking for passage. Instead, burly men in black suits, with radios and spiral cord earphones in their ears, guarded each automatic glass door. Their gazes patrolled the area like wolves protecting a perimeter. They were Robert's men, the lockdown. Lily hid behind an abandoned mailbox on the corner. Her breathing quickened. There were too many. They looked like mountains of muscle compared to her. If she tried to cross the glass doors, she wouldn't last 3 seconds before they threw her onto the asphalt and took the bottle. Her street survival expert gaze began to scan the building. She didn't look at the main entrance or the emergency glass doors. She looked down, towards the side alley. An industrial laundry truck was backing up a concrete ramp. An employee dressed in blue overalls unloaded huge canvas carts full of dirty sheets. The service entrance. Lily tucked the water bottle back under her clothes, pressed it against her flat, hungry stomach, and gritted her teeth. Her eyes turned cold, calculating, and dark. She was no longer the girl who cleaned windshields. She was a soldier with a single mission. "Room 402, she murmured to herself, and like a silent shadow in the exhaust smoke, Lily ran towards the alley, ready to begin the assault that would change the fate of the Sterling Empire forever. The silk scarf secret. 3 drops, just 3 cursed, crystal clear, odorless drops. That was all it took to bring down a titan. 72 hours before the heart monitor line went flat in the hospital, the main office of Sterling Iron and Steel vibrated under Arthur's shouts. The 60-year-old man, with the energy of a bull, threw a thick audit folder against Robert Thorne's chest. Papers flew through the air like funeral confetti. "You're an incompetent parasite, Robert." Arthur roared, placing both hands on his mahogany desk, leaning forward as if to devour his brother-in-law. $30 million diverted in the refinery project. "You thought I wouldn't notice? You thought my auditors are as stupid as you are?" Robert recoiled, his face pale, swallowing hard. "Arthur, please. Import material costs went up. I just tried to balance the books so the board wouldn't panic. Don't lie to me in my own office." Arthur's slam on the wood made the crystal glasses on the drinks cart tremble. "You've been bleeding this company for years to pay your offshore gambling debts. I've tolerated you because you're my sister's husband. But this is over. You're out. I'll prepare your resignation today, and you'll be lucky if I don't put you in jail before the weekend." Victoria Sterling, sitting in a leather armchair in the corner of the room, immediately stood up. Her face, taut from cosmetic procedures, showed not terror, but absolute coldness. Around her neck, she wore her characteristic Italian silk scarf, patterned with dark florals. "Arthur, brother, you'll have a heart attack. Calm down, please," she said, walking with measured steps towards the drinks cart. "You're agitated. Let me pour you your scotch. Your blood pressure is through the roof." "Don't talk to me in that tone of a devoted mother, Victoria." Arthur barked, loosening his tie knot, red with fury and breathing with difficulty. "I know perfectly well you knew about this. Both of you are leeches. Your gold mine is over for both of you." Victoria turned her back. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, but from the pure adrenaline of the moment. She deftly slid her fingers to the knot of her silk scarf. Hidden among the folds of the designer fabric was a tiny crystal vial the size of a fingernail. It had no label. She had acquired it 3 months earlier on the Eastern European black market for an obscene sum, a synthetic compound derived from thallium, modified to evade any standard toxicology test and mimic fulminant liver failure. The original plan was to administer it in small doses over a year, but the imminent dismissal changed everything. It had to be now a massive, lethal, and irreversible dose. With a swift movement, she uncapped the vial, poured the 30-year-old Scotch whiskey into the cut crystal glass, and emptied the entire contents of the vial. The lethal liquid mixed with the amber alcohol without producing a single bubble, without altering the color or smell. She hid the empty vial back in her silk scarf and turned, walking towards the desk with a rehearsed smile of completion. "You're right, Arthur. Robert made an unforgivable mistake. We'll fix it. But first, drink. You need to lower your heart rate before your meeting with the bank," Victoria said, extending her bejeweled hand to give him the glass. Arthur snatched the glass abruptly. His breathing was harsh. He looked at Robert with deep contempt, raised the glass, and drank the contents in a single gulp, letting the alcohol and poison burn his throat. He slammed the empty glass onto the table. "I want your offices empty before the sun sets," he declared, turning to look out the window at his factory chimneys. Not even 20 seconds passed. Arthur placed a hand on his stomach. A muffled, almost animal groan escaped his lips. The folder he held fell to the floor. His legs immediately gave way, collapsing against the armored glass window before falling heavily onto the carpet. He began to convulse, clutching his throat with wild eyes and a thick foam covering his mouth. Robert jumped forward, panic seizing him. "My God, I'll call emergency," he cried, pulling his cell phone from his pocket with clumsy hands. "Stop!" Victoria's voice cut the air like a whip. Robert froze with the phone halfway to his ear. He looked at his wife. Victoria stood motionless, watching her own brother writhe on the floor, choking on his own saliva. "What did you do, Victoria?" Robert whispered, horrified, finally realizing what he had just witnessed. Victoria adjusted her silk scarf around her neck with chilling calm. She looked at the gold watch on her left wrist. "What I had to do to save our inheritance?" she replied, without taking her eyes off Arthur's agonizing body. "If we call now, they'll pump his stomach and he'll destroy us." Arthur scratched the carpet. His bloodshot eyes searched his sister's face, silently begging for help, while his internal organs began to burn from within. "Wait 2 minutes, Robert," Victoria ordered with demonic coldness, crossing her arms as she listened to her blood relative's death rattles. "Let the poison do its work. 2 more minutes and we'll be the owners of Toronto." The monitor at 0. The monitor at 0. The sharp, sustained hum of the heart monitor brought room 402 back to the nightmare of the present. The bright green straight line shone on the screen like a definitive sentence. Arthur Sterling had just collapsed. After swallowing the water the blonde girl had forced him to drink, his body lay inert on the soaked sheets. "Code blue, I said, code blue," roared Dr. Peterson, bursting through the double doors of the intensive care unit, followed by a team of 4 nurses pushing a crash cart at full speed. Chaos multiplied. The nurses pushed Robert and Victoria aside. "Get her out of here! Destroy that brat!" Robert barked at the security guards, his face red with rage, pointing at Lily, who resisted like a wildcat in the arms of the two gigantic men. "He drank it! He drank it!" Lily cried, her voice torn, tears cleaning streaks of mud on her dirty cheeks. She didn't look at the guards twisting her arms. Her eyes remained fixed on Arthur's lifeless body. One of the security guards, a man with a scar above his eyebrow, covered her mouth with his gloved hand and lifted her, dragging her towards the back hallway. The double doors slammed shut, silencing the girl's cries, but leaving behind medical pandemonium. Dr. Peterson literally clambered onto Arthur's bed. He placed both hands on the magnate's chest and began performing chest compressions with desperate brutality. The dull sound of cartilage and ribs yielding under pressure resonated in the room, a horrific sound that made Victoria cover her ears in feigned horror. 1 milligram of adrenaline directly into the central line. Peterson shouted, sweating profusely. "Stop compressions. Charge paddles to 200 joules. A nurse ripped open Arthur's soaked gown, exposing his pale, hairy chest. Another nurse applied a thick gel to the metallic paddles of the defibrillator. "Charged to 200, the nurse announced. "Clear." Peterson removed his hands. The paddles struck Arthur's chest. The millionaire's body arched violently on the bed, an electric spasm that lifted him 15 centimeters off the mattress before he fell back like a sack of lead. Everyone looked at the screen. Beep. Flatline. Not a single electrical jump. Not a single heartbeat. "Charge to 300, Peterson ordered, returning to compressions. His arms trembled with effort. Sweat dripped down his forehead onto Arthur's inert face. "Another dose of adrenaline. Now!" Victoria clung to Robert's arm in the corner of the room. She was sobbing hysterically, a perfect theatrical performance for the security cameras and medical staff. But beneath the crying, her nails dug into her husband's forearm with victorious force. Robert watched the scene, his lips pressed into a thin line, mentally calculating when the stock market would open the next morning. 300 joules ready. Clear. A second, much more violent impact. The machines beside the bed beeped alarms. Arthur's body convulsed with terrifying force, but when he fell again, the flaccidity of death was undeniable. His skin, once pale, began to acquire a waxy grayish tone. The nurse looked at Dr. Peterson and shook her head slowly. "Doctor, no carotid pulse. Pupils are dilated and fixed. No neurological response," the woman whispered, stepping back. Peterson remained motionless, holding the defibrillator paddles in the air. The weight of medical defeat fell upon his shoulders. He looked at Arthur Sterling's body, the most powerful man in the city, defeated by multiple organ failure that no science could stop. He lowered the paddles, took a deep breath, and looked at the digital clock on the wall. "Time of death, 1:14 p. Me," Peterson ordered, his voice hollowed out by exhaustion. Robert lowered his head, covering his eyes with one hand, concealing the icy smile that threatened to break his facade of grief. They had done it. The old man was dead, and the street girl, whoever she was, or wherever she came from, had brought no proof, just a filthy container of water. Arthur's will was now worthless. The empire was theirs. As the doctor began to disconnect the useless tubes from the corpse, 3 floors away in the laundry service ramp, the metal emergency door was kicked open. The 2 guards threw Lily's fragile body out, as if she were a noxious garbage bag. The girl flew through the air, landing violently against the industrial steel containers. Her head hit the corner of a dumpster. A trickle of dark blood flowed from her forehead, running down her eyebrow and blinding her left eye. The pain was searing. She tried to support herself on her hands, but her torn knees gave way, making her fall into the puddles of dirty water in the alley. The guard, with the scar, walked towards her, unbuckling his belt holster. His black assault boots crunched on the asphalt. "Mr. Thorne said we should break your legs, you disgusting brat," the man growled, raising his foot to crush the girl's knee. Lily rolled to the side, dodging the stump by inches. She crawled under the chassis of a running laundry truck, using her tiny size to her advantage. The engine roared, deafening the alley. The guards cursed, crouching to try and pull her out, but the truck driver, oblivious to the drama, put it in first gear and accelerated. The guards had to jump back to avoid being crushed by the rear tires. When the diesel exhaust smoke cleared, the girl had vanished, swallowed by the maze of alleys and the infernal traffic of the avenue. 2 blocks from the hospital, hidden behind a rusty bus stop, Lily collapsed to the ground. She gasped for breath, spitting blood and dust. Her whole body ached as if she had been trampled by a stampede. She reached her trembling hand into her empty pocket. The bottle was gone. There was no water. Any other child in her situation would be crying hysterically, but not Lily. Despite her split lip, the blood on her forehead and her torn clothes, her parched lips curled into a weak smile, but one loaded with unyielding victory. She looked towards the distant glass tower of Mount Sinai Hospital. "I saved you," she whispered into Toronto's stifling wind. "It's already inside. No one can stop it now." And while the city's elite prepared their mourning clothes to celebrate Arthur Sterling's death, under the white sheets of the fourth-floor morgue, a microscopic, biological, and devastating mechanism that Lily had introduced with the water had just been activated. Robert Thorne and Victoria Sterling's game was about to become their own tomb. Crocodile tears. The sound of the cork exploding against the hand-carved plaster ceiling echoed like a festive gunshot in the main library of the Sterling mansion. The golden liquid bubbled, spilling over the edges of the aged Dom Perignon bottle. Robert Thorne didn't bother to clean it. He filled 2 Baccarat crystal glasses to the brim, his hands still trembling slightly, but no longer from the panic of the previous hours at the hospital. It was the pure, raw adrenaline of triumph. He walked across the immense Persian rug and handed one of the glasses to Victoria. She was sitting in front of the gigantic gilded mirror in the room, touching up her waterproof mascara with surgical precision. She had already changed clothes. She wore a high-fashion black morning dress, an exclusive Milan design that cost more than the home of any worker in their factories. "To the king who has died," Robert toasted, raising his glass, his eyes gleaming with greed under the crystal chandelier light. "And to the new owners of Toronto." Victoria took the glass. Her reflection in the mirror returned a cold smile, sharp as a razor. She clinked her glass against her husband's. The chime was a perfect melody to their ears. "To us, darling, and to the blessed stupidity of the medical examiners," she murmured before taking a long, exquisite sip of champagne. "What did they say at the morgue? Any problem with the death certificate?" Robert let out a dry laugh, loosening his black tie knot. "None. Peterson signed the report 20 minutes ago. Fulminant multiple organ failure. The poison you bought is a miracle. Victoria didn't leave a single trace. His liver was so ravaged, they assumed it was a silent, fulminant cirrhosis that complicated. No one will investigate anything. Arthur Sterling is officially a closed medical case." Victoria sighed, leaning back in the chair, closing her eyes with sadistic relief. 15 years, Robert. 15 years enduring his shouts, his humiliations, watching him donate millions to his stupid charity foundations, while we had to beg him for raises at the board meetings. All that is over. First thing tomorrow morning, I want the interior designers here. I'm going to rip out every piece of antiquated wood in this house. Robert nodded, turning his back to pour more champagne, but his mind, always calculating, reviewed the events of the afternoon. A tiny detail, like a splinter under his nail, bothered him. "The guards lost the girl," he said suddenly, his voice darkening. Victoria opened her eyes, annoyed by the interruption of her power fantasy. "What girl?" "The dirty one from the hospital." "What does it matter, Robert?" "She was a deranged beggar who snuck in through emergency. She probably wanted to steal Arthur's watch and, when cornered, threw that bottle of dirty water in his face. She talked as if she knew him, Victoria. He drank it. He drank it. And that scream, 'Wake up! You promised me!' No vagrant gets into the city's most guarded intensive care unit just by chance." Victoria stood up, walking towards him, snatched the champagne bottle from his hands, and slammed it onto the table. "Look at me, Robert. Look me in the eyes," she ordered, grabbing his lapels. "Arthur is on a steel slab in the morgue, freezing at -4 degrees. His brain has been without oxygen for hours. He's dead. Dead. Whether that girl was a ghost, a thief, or an envoy from hell itself, she arrived too late. The water did nothing but choke him and accelerate his damn heart until it burst. She did us a favor." Robert looked at her for a second, searching for any crack in her logic. There was none. The monitor showed a flat line. He himself saw the body turn gray and lifeless. He took a deep breath, letting arrogance inflate his chest again. "You're right. The stress is making me paranoid. I've ordered Miller to double security for tonight's event. No one enters the ceremony without a sealed invitation. We'll close off streets 3 blocks around the church." "Exactly," Victoria smiled, smoothing her husband's suit lapel with venomous affection. "Tonight is our debut. All the political elite, all the dignitaries, and the majority partners will be there. They'll see us cry. They'll see us suffer. And when Mr. Davies opens that will and asks for the stupid bridge proof, there will be absolute silence. No one will come forward. And by legal default, we will take the reins of sterling iron and steel." The phone on the oak desk began to ring. It was the direct line to the most exclusive funeral home in North America. Robert answered. Hello? Mr. Thorne, everything is ready. The funeral director spoke in a ceremonial voice. We have followed Mr. Sterling's pre-mortem instructions to the letter. The coffin has been hermetically sealed, just as he stipulated in the contract a month ago. Robert frowned, exchanging a strange look with Victoria. Sealed? A contract from a month ago? My brother-in-law didn't expect to die. Why the hell would he ask for a sealed coffin so far in advance? I wanted the coffin open so the press could take photos of the family saying goodbye. I'm very sorry, Mr. Thorne. It's an unbreakable protocol, notarized by law. Mr. Sterling demanded that his body not be exposed under any circumstances, and that the solid mahogany casket be screwed shut before leaving our facilities. It's already in the hearse, en route to St. James Cathedral. Robert swallowed, feeling a slight shiver down his neck. A healthy old man, making such specific preparations, unless he knew someone was going to try to kill him. All right, so be it. See you there. Robert hung up abruptly. Victoria looked at him expectantly. What now? Robert forced a smile, hiding his sudden unease under a mask of absolute control. Nothing. An eccentricity of a paranoid old man, even in death. Let's go, Victoria. It's time to give the best performance of our miserable lives. The curtain is about to open. The mahogany casket. The immensity of St. James Cathedral in Toronto was suffocating, not from the dying afternoon heat outside, but from the dense, sweet, almost nauseating scent of over 10,000 white lilies that choked the high altar. It had cost $2,000 to fly those flowers in private planes from Colombia that very afternoon. Everything had to be excessive. Everything had to scream power. The heavy carved wooden doors of the church were guarded by 12 men in black, armed and discreet. In the mahogany pews, covered with velvet cushions, sat the gross national product of the entire nation. Corrupt politicians with long faces, bankers calculating the future of steel stocks, rival businessmen feigning sadness, and trophy wives silently competing to see who wore the most ostentatious mourning jewelry. In the exact center of the main aisle, facing the altar, rested the casket. It was a solid African mahogany coffin, so polished that it reflected the light of the hundreds of candles arranged around it. The solid gold fittings gleamed with a reddish hue under the stained glass light. It was an imposing, cold, completely sealed wooden fortress. In the front row, Victoria Sterling sobbed into a black lace handkerchief. Her performance was worthy of an Academy Award. Her shoulders trembled rhythmically. Beside her, Robert Thorne maintained the posture of a pillar of strength, his jaw tense and his gaze fixed on the sealed coffin. But inside, Robert was seething. His eyes kept darting towards a stooped man in a drab grey suit and wire-rimmed glasses who stood in a corner of the altar, ignoring the dean's eulogy. It was Mr. Davies. The notary clutched a black leather briefcase to his chest, as if it were a shield. The briefcase that contained the destiny of the largest company in the North. Taking advantage of the dean beginning to sprinkle holy water around the candles, Robert discreetly rose from the front row. He walked along the side edge of the altar, disappearing into the shadows of the marble columns until he intercepted Mr. Davies. Let's get this over with, lawyer, Robert hissed, cornering the old man against the cold stone wall, keeping his voice so low that it was inaudible 3 meters away. The dean is about to give the final blessing. Get the document, go to the podium, read that we are the heirs, and let's get out of here. The press is waiting outside for my official statement as the new CEO. Mr. Davies slowly adjusted his glasses, showing not a hint of intimidation towards the businessman. Mr. Thorne, my instructions are notarized under federal law. I will not open this briefcase, nor will I read the will until the sun has completely set over the skyline and the last prayer of this ceremony has concluded. Don't be stupid, stubborn old man. Robert grabbed his arm, his fingers digging into the cheap fabric of the notary's suit. Look around you. The church is militarized. If anyone was going to bring that bridge proof, if anyone was going to claim the company, they would have arrived by now. There's no one. Arthur died, and his plan failed. There is no secret heir. It's us. So do your job, and give me my company. Mr. Davies pulled free with a dignified tug. His gaze was pure ice. Mr. Sterling's will was absolute. At the end of the burial, he dictated, "There are exactly 12 minutes left until sunset. If you cannot maintain your composure for 12 minutes for the man who fed you your entire life, that is your problem. If no one crosses the doors when the countdown ends, the company will be yours. But until then, you don't own even the air you breathe in this church. The lawyer turned his back, returning to his stoic position. Robert felt a vein pulse with fury in his temple. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. He turned around, returning to his seat beside Victoria, feeling every gaze from high society fixed on him, judging him, evaluating if he would be able to keep the empire afloat. He sat down. Victoria leaned towards him. "What's wrong? Why doesn't he read the damned paper?" she whispered without moving her lips, keeping her gaze forward. "The miserable notary wants to wait until sunset." "It's bureaucratic red tape," Robert muttered, looking at his watch. 9 minutes, Victoria. 9 minutes and this entire 5-year nightmare ends. The dean raised his hands to the sky. The music from the cathedral's giant organ began to play, a mournful, grave, heavy melody that made the marble floor vibrate beneath their feet. "My brothers and sisters," the dean's voice resonated through the loudspeakers, filling every corner of the immense vault. "Today we bid farewell to Arthur Sterling, a titan of industry, a pillar of this city. May the Lord receive his soul into perpetual light, and may those who remain find the solace of truth." Outside, through the immense stained glass windows, the last rays of the sun faded, tinging the glass with intense blood red. The interior of the cathedral began to darken, illuminated only by the trembling light of the candles surrounding the immense mahogany casket. Robert looked at his watch once more. 3 minutes. He looked towards the closed doors of the main entrance. They were blocked by his security guards. No one would enter. The triumph was total, absolute, and perfect. No one in Toronto, or all of Canada, had the power to stop what was about to happen. The dean lowered his hands, made the sign of the cross, and pronounced the final words. "Go in peace, the ceremony is over." A hushed murmur swept through the church. The organ played its last long, mournful chord. Robert stood up instantly, losing no time, buttoned his jacket, and made an imperative signal to Mr. Davies with his hand. It was the sign of victory. The elderly notary nodded slowly. He unfastened the metallic latches of his briefcase with 2 dry clicks that resonated in the sepulchral silence that had fallen over the church and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. Victoria squeezed her husband's hand, trembling with genuine emotion. The mobile phone cameras of some attendees began to rise discreetly in the back pews, ready to record the historic transfer of power. Mr. Davies walked to the altar podium microphone, cleared his throat. The amplified sound echoed in the stone vault. "Ladies and gentlemen, by direct and irrevocable order of the deceased Mr. Arthur Sterling, I proceed to read his last will and testament." Robert raised his chin, already feeling like the king of the world, ready to walk forward and receive the keys to the kingdom. Mr. Davies broke the wax seal, and just at that damned instant, as the paper was about to be unfolded under the candlelight, bang! A dry, metallic, brutal thud resounded from the back of the church. It wasn't a knock on the door. It was the sound of heavy metal hitting the floor. The security guards at the main entrance hadn't opened the doors. The doors had been kicked in from the outside with a force that made the century-old hinges tremble. All of Toronto's elite, the 100 souls present, turned their heads in unison towards the back of the nave. Robert Thorne felt the ground open beneath his feet. The heavy wooden doors began to open slowly, creaking on the ancient marble, letting in a gust of hot street wind that extinguished dozens of candles around the coffin in one fell swoop. The murmur of the crowd instantly transformed into a collective gasp of terror. It wasn't a military battalion. It wasn't the police. In the threshold of the giant doors, silhouetted against the backlight of flashing patrol sirens behind her, stood a solitary tiny figure. A blonde girl, her face crossed by a crust of dried blood, her left eye bruised and swollen, and her torn clothes covered in mud and engine grease. But she was no longer running, no longer crying. She walked down the central aisle of the cathedral, with the firm, implacable posture of a general invading conquered territory. Her holy sneakers trod on the red carpet, staining the immaculate aisle with the dirt of the streets that high society preferred to ignore. And behind her, flanking her like lethal shadows, advanced 5 gigantic men in black, heavily armed, dragging Robert's guards by their jacket collars, as if they were discarded ragdolls. Victoria Sterling let her silk scarf fall to the floor. Her legs lost all strength. "No," Robert whispered, stepping back, feeling a cold, deadly sweat freeze his back. "It's impossible." I saw her flee. They threw her onto the street. Lily did not look at the horrified crowd. She did not look at the luxuries, nor the stained glass windows, nor the dean paralyzed with fear. Her eyes, fierce and dark, fixed directly on the sealed mahogany casket. And then she raised her small right hand, which she had kept hidden behind her back the entire time. In her dirty, bruised fist, she clutched with supernatural strength an object wrapped in a soot-stained cloth. The physical proof had arrived at the church. Robert Thorne's nightmare was just beginning. Footsteps in the church. The crunch of tactical boots against the cathedral's century-old marble sounded like a firing squad preparing to open fire. The organ music had abruptly ceased. The silence that gripped the immense edifice was so thick, so laden with terror, that the sound of 100 people's breathing seemed to have vanished. The hot street wind stirred the flames of the few candles still flickering around the coffin, casting monstrous shadows on the stone walls. Lily advanced. She did not run. She did not tremble. She walked through the exact center of the cardinal red carpet with the coldness of an executioner. Her torn clothes, stained with black grease and dry earth, contrasted grotesquely and fascinatingly with the opulence of the high society that shrank from her path. The dried blood on her forehead formed a dark crust, and her left eye, swollen and bruised, gave her a fierce, almost inhuman appearance. Behind her, formed in a perfect tactical wedge, marched 5 men who made Robert's guards look like scared children. They wore matte black assault uniforms with no police insignias, only a small silver shield on their right shoulder with the initials FS, Fausto Sterling, now Arthur Sterling. They wore heavy ballistic vests, compact assault rifles slung across their chests, and the dead gaze of elite mercenaries. They dragged 3 of Robert's security men by their collars, tossing them onto the marble floor like useless garbage bags. "What does this mean?" Robert Thorne roared, breaking the paralysis. His voice, loaded with hysterical panic disguised as authority, bounced off the church dome. "Security! Get that scum out of here! Call the police! This is a terrorist attack!" None of his remaining guards moved. They were petrified, their trembling hands far from their weapons, evaluating in microseconds that if they drew a gun in front of those 5 giants in black, they wouldn't leave the aisle alive. Lily was unfazed by Robert's shouts. Her holy sneakers continued to mark an implacable rhythm. Clap, clap, clap. Each step shortened the distance to the high altar. Each step was another nail in the Thorne coffin. Victoria Sterling began to hyperventilate. Her jeweled hands clutched the carved wooden pew in front of her with such force that her knuckles seemed about to burst through her skin. "It's her," Victoria whispered, her eyes wide, mascara streaking her pale cheeks. "Robert, it's the girl from the hospital. I told you she was alive. I told you." "Shut up," Robert hissed, pushing her back. He took 2 strides to the center of the aisle, blocking the path to the coffin. He unbuttoned his jacket, puffing out his chest, trying to project a shadow of power that was crumbling by the second. "Stop. You are desecrating a private funeral. I will bury you in prison for the rest of your miserable lives." The leader of the tactical team, a bald man with a scar crossing his jaw, raised a gloved hand. The other 4 mercenaries stopped dead. Lily also stopped, standing exactly 3 meters from Robert. The mercenary fixed his dark eyes on the businessman. His voice was deep, raspy, and devoid of any emotion. "One more step towards the girl, Mr. Thorne, and I will break both your legs in front of your entire board of directors. We are under strict, notarized orders. Step back." The dignitaries, bankers, and partners of Sterling Iron and Steel, seated in the front rows, began to murmur frantically. The screens of dozens of cell phones gleamed in the gloom, recording every second of the humiliation. "Orders from whom?" "I am the new president of Sterling Iron and Steel," Robert spat, shielding himself with his title, though cold sweat soaked his shirt collar. "My orders." An elderly but powerful voice resonated from the altar. Everyone turned their heads. Mr. Davies, the notary who had remained a statue of drab opacity throughout the ceremony, slowly descended the 3 steps of the high altar. His wire-rimmed glasses reflected the candlelight. His posture had completely changed. He was no longer the submissive bureaucrat, he was the executioner of the law. Mr. Davies walked to stand beside Lily. He looked at the injured girl, covered in grime and blood, and for a fraction of a second, the old lawyer's eyes welled up with a mixture of pain and profound reverence. Then he looked at Robert with absolute contempt. "The sun has set, Mr. Thorne," Mr. Davies declared, pointing to the darkened stained-glass windows. "The deadline has passed, and Mr. Sterling's guest of honor has arrived exactly on time. Step aside, or I will ask Mr. Sterling's private guard to remove you by force." Robert looked at the lawyer, then at the mercenaries, and finally at the 15 guests who watched him with a mixture of morbid curiosity and horror. He was cornered. He swallowed, tasting the metallic flavor of fear, and awkwardly backed away, bumping into the edge of the pew where Victoria trembled uncontrollably. The aisle was clear. "Mr." Davies gave Lily a slight nod. The girl advanced the last few meters, climbed the first marble step, then the second, until she stood face to face with the immense sealed mahogany casket. The contrast was brutal and cinematic. The bloodied, impoverished heiress from the streets, claiming her place in front of the fortress of wood and gold that contained Toronto's titan. The proof in dirty hands. The silence was so absolute that you could hear the sizzling of candle wax melting onto the marble. Lily looked at the polished wood of the coffin. Her breathing, once ragged, became deep and controlled. For a second, it seemed she was about to cry, but she clenched her jaw with a ferocity that forced Victoria to look away. "Mr." Davies stood beside her, holding a small wireless microphone that resonated throughout the vault. "My dear," the notary spoke, his voice projecting into every corner of the church, addressing her with a respect he had never shown Robert. "Arthur Sterling's will stipulates a single condition to inherit his empire. Do you carry with you the proof of the promise made on the Bloor Viaduct 15 years ago?" Robert let out a nervous, shrill, unhinged laugh from the front row. "It's a farce. She's a cheap actress you hired, Davies. That street rat has nothing. Check her pockets. She probably stole something from the garbage," he yelled, losing the last trace of Italian elegance he had left. Lily slowly turned her neck towards Robert. Her immense dark eyes pierced him like two ice knives. She didn't say a single word. She simply raised her small right hand, which she had kept hidden behind her back throughout her triumphant entrance. In her dirty fist, she clutched with supernatural strength an object wrapped in a grey, soot-stained linen cloth. With slow, calculated movements, Lily began to unroll the cloth. The dirty fabric fell to the marble floor. The flickering candlelight reflected a silver glint that momentarily blinded the front rows. In the girl's open palm rested a flower, but it was no ordinary flower. It was a heavy, crude steel rose. Its petals were forged from solid metal with evident hammer marks, hand-cast with beautiful imperfection. In the exact center of the metallic flower was an inscription deeply engraved in the steel: "For Sarah, my only owner, FS, and Bloor Viaduct." A collective gasp swept through the cathedral. The oldest bankers and founding partners of the company opened their eyes wide. That rose was an urban legend within the halls of sterling iron and steel, the first block of steel cast by the company, shaped by Arthur's own hands, when he was still a young worker dedicated to the only love his family had forced him to abandon. "Mr." Davies approached, pulled a small ultraviolet flashlight from his pocket, and aimed it at the base of the rose. A chemical watermark, invisible to the naked eye and exclusive to the company's vaults, glowed phosphorescent green. The notary raised his head and looked at the crowd, his voice trembling with the magnitude of the moment. "The proof is authentic. The steel rose has returned by legal and irrevocable mandate. This child, direct heir to the blood of Sarah Chen, is, as of this cursed second, the absolute owner of 95% of the shares, properties, and liquid capital of Sterling Iron and Steel." The legal gavel blow fell on Robert like an anvil. He dropped to his knees on the red carpet. His legs could no longer support his own weight. His face contorted into a grimace of pure agony, as if his soul were being ripped from his throat. "No, no, no," Robert sobbed, scratching the fabric of his luxury trousers, crawling forward. "That company is mine. I worked for it. I endured that miserable old man. It's a fraud." But Lily wasn't finished. The girl looked at the broken man at her feet with chilling coldness. The story's script still held its darkest card. "My grandfather Arthur not only left me this flower," Lily spoke. Her childish voice resonated through the loudspeakers via Mr. Davies' microphone, sharp and so firm that it echoed in the vaults. "He told me that the day I had to bring it would be because you two finally dared to kill him." The silence that followed those words was so brutal that it paralyzed the heart of the entire city. Cell phone cameras stopped moving. The dignitaries froze in their seats. Victoria Sterling stopped breathing. Her face seemed to age 10 years in a single second. "She's lying! She's a psychopath! Get her out of here!" Victoria screamed, jumping to her feet, backing towards the stone wall, tripping over her own heels. Lily knelt and picked up the dirty cloth from the floor. Within its stained folds was a second object, a small, bright red USB drive and a stack of printed photographs. She handed them to Mr. Davies. The lawyer held the package high, so all the politicians and bankers could see it clearly. 3 days before his collapse, Mr. Sterling ordered a private international investigation, Mr. Davies announced, his voice implacable as that of a judge pronouncing a death sentence. In my hands, I hold the complete financial report of the $30 million diversion to offshore accounts by Robert Thorne, and more chillingly, Mr. Davies unfolded the photographs, showing them to the front row. They were crisp security images. They showed Victoria Sterling in an Eastern European alley, handing a briefcase full of cash to a man with a covered face, receiving a small glass vial in return. Here is the proof of the purchase on the European black market of a lethal thallium derivative, undetectable in common autopsies, a poison designed to simulate fulminant liver failure. The cathedral erupted in absolute chaos. Murmurs turned into shouts of horror and repudiation. Business partners who 10 minutes ago offered their condolences to Robert now recoiled in disgust, calling the police and their own lawyers. Victoria, cornered and gripped by the most animalistic panic, instinctively brought her hands to her neck. She squeezed her expensive silk scarf, trying to protect her throat. It was the worst mistake she could make. The tactical team leader took 2 quick steps, closing the distance to her. He grabbed Victoria by the wrist with steel strength and pulled the silk knot. The designer scarf unraveled and fell to the church floor. And from among the folds of the fabric, a tiny glass vial rolled across the marble, stopping exactly at Lily's blood-stained feet. The empty vial, the murder weapon. "The poison is still with you, Mrs. Sterling," the mercenary said, in an icy voice, pulling out a pair of black steel handcuffs from his assault belt. "The federal police and Interpol have been waiting outside this church for half an hour. The doors are no longer closed to protect you from the press. They are closed to prevent you from escaping." Robert looked at the vial on the floor. He looked at his handcuffed wife. He looked at the dirty girl who now controlled the world he thought he owned. The heart attack of absolute defeat struck his chest, leaving him breathless, kneeling before the coffin. He lowered his gaze to the homicidal vial. Then he looked at the immense sealed mahogany casket behind him. His breathing quickened again. He had fulfilled his mission. He had destroyed the murderers, but in her brilliant, childlike mind, only the echo of the water bottle she had given him at the hospital resonated. She turned, her back to the fallen vultures, and placed her small, dirty hands on the gleaming wood of the coffin. "I did it," she whispered to the wood. "They are destroyed. Now it's your turn. Fulfill your part." And then, before the astonished gaze of 150 people, a raspy, dry, eerie sound came from inside the solid mahogany casket. Someone or something was scratching the wood from within. What the water really was. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound wasn't loud, but in the sepulchral silence of the cathedral, it resonated like thunder. It was the unmistakable sound of desperate human nails scratching the solid wood and silk lining from inside the mahogany box. A sharp, terrified scream escaped the throat of the dignitary's wife, sitting in the third row. That scream was the trigger. Panic erupted like a bomb. Bankers in $5,000 suits stumbled over each other, pushing the heavy wooden pews back in their desperate attempt to get away from the altar. High society women dropped their purses and covered their faces, retreating towards the side aisles. The dean backed up until he hit the tabernacle, crossing himself with trembling hands and wide eyes. "It's a trick! It's a recording!" Robert Thorne shrieked from the floor, his voice broken by a primal terror that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. "Davies, you miserable old man, you put a speaker in there. My brother-in-law is dead. I saw the monitor at 0. I saw his corpse." Victoria Sterling, on her knees and her hands cuffed behind her back by the mercenary, shook her head frantically. Black mascara smeared her entire face, giving her the appearance of a mad specter. "It can't be! The poison was lethal! His organs were destroyed!" she screamed, losing all filter of sanity. "I myself saw him swallow the entire dose." The leader of the tactical team released Victoria, letting her fall face down onto the red carpet, and walked towards the coffin. From his tactical vest, he extracted a heavy black steel bar, a demolition crowbar designed to burst armored doors. Lily didn't move from her spot. Her dark eyes gleamed with feverish intensity, fixed on the wood that vibrated under the sound of internal thuds. "It wasn't a recording, Robert. Mr. Davies spoke through the microphone, his voice cutting through the chaos of the church like a scythe. "And what this brave girl gave him in the hospital, outsmarting all your stupid security guards, wasn't water either." Robert stopped his crawl on the floor, lifting his face, bathed in cold sweat, towards the notary. "Mr. Sterling knew everything," Mr. Davies continued implacably. "He knew he was being slowly poisoned for weeks. His trusted doctors in Europe warned him of the heavy metals in his blood. But Mr. Sterling needed irrefutable proof. He needed you to make the final mistake in front of witnesses and cameras. He needed time to shield his only granddaughter from your ambition. Mr. Davies pointed to the empty bottle that Lily had dropped in the alley, now imaginary, but whose weight fell upon the scene. That dented plastic bottle contained an experimental Swiss compound, synthesized specifically to neutralize the thallium derivative that Mrs. Sterling bought in Eastern Europe, but it had an extreme side effect: total neuromuscular paralysis combined with a massive beta blocker. It reduced Mr. Sterling's heart rate to 1 beat every 3 minutes. Undetectable by the standard machines of a hospital bought by you. Undetectable by a corrupt and frightened doctor. The scratching sound in the casket turned into a dull, rhythmic thud. Thump, thump. Someone was hitting the lid from inside with a closed fist. "That girl didn't come to kill him," Mr. Davies roared, pointing an accusing finger at Robert. "She came to give him the exact antidote at the exact moment. The dose you gave him in the office, Mrs. Sterling, would have melted his liver in 30 minutes. If Lily had arrived 1 minute late at the hospital, if your thugs had stopped her on the avenue, Arthur Sterling would truly be dead." Robert dropped his head against the marble. The air left his lungs. It wasn't a financial defeat. It was a total annihilation. They had been pawns on a giant chessboard, moved at will by the man they thought they had murdered. "Open the casket," Mr. Davies ordered. The 4 remaining mercenaries approached the African mahogany coffin, the impregnable fortress that Arthur had contractually demanded a month earlier. It wasn't to prevent them from seeing him dead. It was to prevent him from being autopsied and truly killed in the morgue. It was hermetically sealed and had an internal oxygen tank hidden in the base, enough to keep a man alive for 6 hours, the exact time between leaving the funeral home and the end of the burial. The tactical leader fitted the flat tip of the steel crowbar into the slot beneath the solid gold fittings. "On 3!" the mercenary growled. The men leaned their weight. The bankers at the back of the church held their breath. The silence was cutting, lethal. 1, 2, 3. The crunch of splintering mahogany echoed like an explosion. The security bolts flew through the air, bouncing off the altar steps. The wood yielded with a sharp groan. The 5 men pushed the heavy top lid back. The coffin burst open, releasing a cloud of cold vapor condensed by the dry ice that adorned the interior to simulate corpse refrigeration. No one breathed. No one blinked. A pale, trembling hand, but covered in rings of power, clutched the edge of the splintered box. The knuckles were white with effort, the fingers digging into the wood, and slowly, from the depths of the white silk, a figure began to sit up. The dead man, who heard everything. Terror has many faces, but none is as devastating as that of a ghost returning to collect its debts. Arthur Sterling sat up inside the coffin. His appearance was chilling. He wore the black dress suit in which he had been prepared for his funeral, but his shirt was soaked in a cold, sickly sweat. His skin had a translucent, almost waxy tone, a consequence of the brutal poison and the induced cardiac arrest. He breathed with a noisy difficulty, filling his lungs with stale air, coughing dryly, but his eyes burned with the fire of hell. They were bloodshot, alive, furious, and fixed directly on the 2 pathetic figures writhing on the floor in front of him. The entire church erupted in muffled screams. Several dignitaries turned and ran towards the side doors, colliding with the assault guards who blocked the exits with their rifles raised. No one would leave until the king finished speaking. The mercenary leader extended his massive arm. Arthur grasped the man's forearm, and with a superhuman effort that made his numb joints crack, he emerged from the mahogany box. His morning-shod feet touched the marble floor. He trembled for an instant, but straightened up. He was the very image of absolute power returning from the grave. Arthur ignored the hysterical crowd. He ignored the emergency medical team from his private staff, who were already rushing in through the sacristy door with real oxygen tanks. He only had eyes for his family. He walked slowly, dragging his left leg slightly, until he stopped a meter from Robert Thorne. Robert was curled in a ball, trembling uncontrollably, unable to lift his gaze beyond the polished shoes of the man he thought he had killed. "The cold of the steel slab is something you don't forget, Robert," Arthur spoke. His voice was a hoarse whisper, broken by the chemicals, but it was amplified in the perfect acoustics of the cathedral. Every word was a whip of acid. "It's a cold that chills you to the bone, that paralyzes your lungs." Victoria let out an animalistic groan from the floor, writhing against the handcuffs. "No, no, Arthur, forgive me. It was him. Robert forced me," she cried, tears streaking her black-smeared face, crawling like a worm over her high-fashion dress, trying to kiss her brother's shoes. "He ruined the company. He bought the poison. I'm your sister, Arthur. Your own blood." Arthur looked down at her. The disgust on his face was so profound it seemed to deform him. I was paralyzed on that hospital gurney, Victoria, Arthur said, his breath hissing in his chest. My heart was barely beating, my eyes were closed, and my lungs were connected to a machine, but my brain was completely lucid. The antidote keeps you conscious. I heard everything. Robert let out a choked sob. His bladder let go, staining his Italian wool trousers with a dark puddle that spread across the marble. I heard you celebrating with Dr. Peterson. I heard you counting the minutes for them to disconnect the machine. Arthur continued, lowering his tone, making it even more terrifying. And in the morgue, before they sealed this box, I heard the champagne cork you opened in my own house. I heard your toast to the new owners of Toronto. Arthur leaned slightly forward. I have no sister. And you, Robert, no longer have a life. Interpol is not only looking for you for premeditated attempted murder. International auditors have just delivered to the federal government the evidence of money laundering, tax fraud, and diversion of resources that you carried out in my name. You will rot in different maximum security prisons, and I will personally ensure that you do not see the light of day for a single day during the next 40 years. Arthur raised his hand weakly. It was a simple, almost lazy gesture, but it was enough. The heavy main doors of the church opened wide, and this time, it wasn't mercenaries who entered, but 24 federal police agents, heavily armed, accompanied by prosecutors in ballistic vests. They marched down the central aisle, ignoring the city's elite who recoiled in terror. They grabbed Robert by the arms, lifting him from the floor without any delicacy. The man offered no resistance. His eyes were empty. His mind had completely shattered. Victoria shrieked with pure hysteria, kicking and spitting, dragged by 2 female officers, while cursing her brother's name and that of the street girl. The couple's shouts faded into the distance, devoured by the sirens of patrol cars waiting on the avenue. Silence returned to the cathedral, but this time it wasn't a silence of tension, but of absolute submission. The entire Sterling Empire had just witnessed the most brutal and calculated purge in the country's business history. Arthur took a deep breath, swaying slightly. Mr. Davies was by his side in a second, holding his arm, while one of the private doctors discreetly placed a transparent oxygen mask over his face for a few seconds. Arthur inhaled deeply, removed the mask, and turned his head. 2 meters from him, Lily still stood. The girl who cleaned windshields, the girl with the holy sneakers, the owner of 95% of the steel in the north, was covered in dirt, dried blood, and sweat, still holding the heavy steel rose in her small, dirty hands. The relentless titan of business, the man who had just destroyed his own family without blinking, walked towards her. His hardened face broke for the first time. His knees, weak from the poison, finally gave way. Arthur Sterling fell to his knees in front of the one-year-old girl. Toronto's elite watched in astonishment as the richest man in the province bowed his head before a street child. Arthur extended his trembling hands and with infinite delicacy brushed a lock of tangled blonde hair from Lily's dirty face, brushing against the wound on her forehead. His eyes, once full of fire and revenge, were now flooded with genuine tears, tears of a man who had recovered the only treasure that money could not buy. "You did it, my little lioness," Arthur whispered, his voice broken by an emotion that tore at his chest. "You crossed the city. You outsmarted the wolves. You brought me the water. You saved my life, just as your grandmother Sarah saved my soul 15 years ago." Lily didn't cry with relief. Her face maintained that fierce maturity forged on the asphalt, but her small arms rose and wrapped around the old man's neck, hugging him with desperate strength, burying her dirty face in the shoulder of her grandfather's fine black suit. "You promised me you wouldn't die if I made it in time," she murmured, her voice muffled against the fabric. "We street kids never break promises." Arthur closed his eyes, embracing her with all the remaining strength he had, feeling the beating of his true and only heir's heart against his own. "You will never return to a traffic light. I swear it on my life," Arthur sobbed, kissing the girl's grimy crown, while the echo of his words resonated like an unbreakable law throughout the church. "This city is yours, Lily, and may God have mercy on whoever tries to take it from you." Mr. Davies slowly nodded from the altar, closing his leather briefcase with a definitive click. The mercenaries in black deployed around the grandfather and granddaughter, forming an impenetrable wall of human steel against the politicians and businessmen who watched the dawn of a new era. The giant had fallen only to rise stronger, and the Iron Crown of Toronto had just been placed upon the head of the girl who, with a simple bottle of water, had forever drowned the true monsters. The Heiress of Toronto. The air in the cathedral remained unbreathable, but the atmosphere had mutated from funeral terror to absolute submission. Arthur Sterling, leaning heavily on the shoulder of his one-year-old granddaughter, looked up at the 150 guests who still remained frozen in the mahogany pews. The dignitaries who an hour ago offered their condolences to Robert now avoided eye contact. The bankers, who sharpened their claws to dismember sterling iron and steel, swallowed hard, feeling cold sweat trickle down their starched collars. Arthur released Lily for a second, took an unsteady step towards the center of the altar, and snatched the microphone from Mr. Davies' hands. "Look at her!" Arthur roared. His voice, amplified by the vault's loudspeakers, sounded like the thunder preceding a hurricane. He pointed at the girl covered in grime, dried blood, and grease, who stood upright like an infantry soldier next to the shattered coffin. "Open your eyes wide and look at her." The echo of his words bounced off the darkened, stained glass windows. No politician dared to move. No businessman dared to whisper. "You, the untouchable elite," Arthur spat, sweeping his bloodshot gaze across the front rows. "You who build glass walls so as not to see the misery that feeds our factories. You believed that my empire would fall into the hands of a casino-addicted parasite and a murderous viper. You thought you could devour my legacy, but you were outmatched. You were defeated by a girl who slept on cardboard, who ate scraps from your luxury restaurants, and who crossed the hell of this city barefoot to save my life." Arthur turned, extending his hand towards Lily. The girl stepped forward, grasping her grandfather's hand with a strength that belied her physical fragility. "Her name is Lily Chen," Arthur announced, and each syllable was a block of steel striking the marble. "She carries the blood of the only woman I ever loved, the blood my own family forced me to abandon on the street decades ago for being unworthy. Today, that unworthy blood is its owner. She is the owner of the foundries, of the refineries, of the foreign bank accounts, and of the ground you are standing on at this very instant." The silence was so thick it could be cut with a knife. "Whoever tries to deceive her, whoever tries to belittle her because of her age or her origin, whoever dares to look down on her, will face me. And you have already seen what I am capable of, even from the grave. You may leave. My funeral is over." Arthur dropped the microphone, letting it fall to the floor with a feedback shriek that made the attendees shudder. No one said a word. One by one, the most powerful men in the country bowed their heads in a silent, compelled reverence. The bankers retreated. The politicians hastened to leave through the side doors. Toronto's royalty had been subdued in less than 20 minutes. 4 hours later, the Sterling mansion. The silence in the immense Rosedale property was different from that of the church. It was a clean, purified silence. All of Robert and Victoria's trusted employees had been dismissed and expelled by the private security mercenaries before Arthur crossed the threshold. In the immense master suite, a team of private doctors had installed an intensive monitoring unit. Arthur lay in the silk-sheeted bed, with an intravenous drip cleaning the last traces of poison and antidote from his blood. His breathing was now regular. Color had returned to his cheeks. The solid oak door opened slowly. Lily entered. She was no longer the girl from the traffic light. The housekeepers had bathed her, scrubbing weeks of grease and mud from her skin with a delicacy the girl had never known. They had treated the wound on her forehead with butterfly stitches and applied ice to her bruised eye. Her blonde hair, free of knots and dirt, fell cleanly over her shoulders. However, she had staunchly refused to wear the lace and silk dresses that Victoria kept in the guest wardrobes. Instead, she wore black track pants and a grey cotton t-shirt, sober, comfortable, ready to run, if necessary. The instinct for survival wasn't washed away with hot water. She walked to the edge of the immense bed and crossed her arms, looking at the machines. Arthur opened his eyes and smiled weakly. "You don't seem impressed with the house," the old man murmured. "It's too big. There's too much empty space where enemies can hide." Lily replied with a raw street logic that made Arthur let out a dry laugh that turned into a cough. "You have her same look, the same wild distrust," Arthur whispered, pointing to the nightstand. There rested the heavy steel rose. "Your grandmother, Sarah, was relentless," he continued, his eyes clouded with nostalgia. "When my father threatened her to disappear, she didn't take a single cent from my family. She only took that steel rose and your mother in her womb. It took me 10 years to discover I had a daughter, and it took me 5 more years to track that daughter through the city's poorest neighborhoods, only to find she had died of pneumonia, leaving you alone in the world." Lily looked down, clenching her fists. "I was on the streets a long time. No one came looking for me," she said with a silent tone of accusation, without shedding a single tear. "I know, and it's my greatest sin. I found you a month ago, Lily. My investigators photographed you on that avenue. I was ready to bring you here, to give you the whole world. But then I discovered Robert's money diversion, and my doctors in Europe found the thallium in my blood. I knew my sister and her husband were murdering me. Arthur extended his IV-marked hand, reaching for his granddaughter's. Lily hesitated for a second, but finally intertwined her small fingers with his. If I had brought you to this house while they had power, they would have killed you too as soon as I closed my eyes. They would have poisoned you, thrown you down a staircase, made you disappear. To save you, I had to destroy them first. I had to leave you on the street for another month, watched from afar, and force you to be the instrument of my revenge. Do you forgive me for making you cross that hell today? Lily looked at the steel rose. She remembered the fear, the pain of falling, the blood, and the terror of the hospital. Then she looked at her grandfather, the only man who had promised her something and kept it. We street kids don't forgive, we simply survive, Lily said with a coldness that simultaneously chilled and proudened Arthur's heart. They tried to crush us. We crushed them better. We're even, old man. Arthur smiled, closing his eyes with absolute peace. The empire was in the right hands, hands forged in the cruelest fire. 14 kilometers from the mansion, hell had a different postal code. The heavy steel gates of Maple Creek Penitentiary slammed shut with a metallic clang that echoed down the damp concrete hallway. Robert Thorne was thrown into cell 3 of the intake area. He tripped over his own feet, falling to his knees on a floor covered in dubious stains and an ammonia smell that turned his stomach. He no longer wore his $5,000 Italian suit. He wore a rough khaki prison-issue uniform that chafed his silk-accustomed skin. You can't do this to me. I have a right to a call. I demand my lawyers from the international firm, Robert yelled, grabbing the rusty bars of the cell, shaking them with impotent fury. The duty guard, a huge man with a neck tattoo, stopped in front of the cell. He smiled, pulled a black baton from his belt, and struck the bars just centimeters from Robert's fingers, making him recoil with a cry of terror. Your lawyers resigned 2 hours ago, Thorne, the guard growled, laughing cruelly. Your offshore accounts were seized by Interpol. Your credit cards are blocked. Your house is in Mr. Sterling's company name. You don't have money to buy even a stick of gum at this prison's commissary. You're less than garbage in here. In the women's wing, a kilometer away, Victoria's fate was no different. Sitting on the metal cot without a mattress, the woman who hours ago planned to redecorate the most expensive mansion in the province looked at her own trembling hands. They had forced her to remove her makeup with industrial soap that left her skin red and burning. They had taken her diamond rings. They had taken her dignity. The other 3 inmates in her cell, women convicted of murder and drug trafficking, watched her from the corner like wolves evaluating a crippled lamb. That blonde hair of yours is going to get dirty real fast in here, princess, one of the inmates murmured, showing rotten teeth as she pulled out a makeshift knife made from a melted toothbrush. Victoria shrank against the concrete block wall, closing her eyes, crying silently. There was no escape, no bail. Arthur had made sure the federal judges rejected any appeal. The poison of betrayal had finally swallowed her. A month later, Sterling Tower corporate headquarters. The 45th floor boardroom was a sanctuary of power. An immense oval black glass table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by 12 executive leather chairs, where the most ruthless operational directors of the steel industry sat. The men in gray suits murmured among themselves. Nervousness hung in the air. It was the first official board meeting since the funeral incident. The frosted glass double doors opened. Silence fell over the room. Arthur Sterling entered, sitting in a motorized wheelchair. He was still recovering from liver damage. His face looked emaciated, but his posture still radiated an authority that paralyzed hearts. Mr. Davies walked beside his right, holding a briefcase full of contracts. But all eyes were not on the old man. They were fixed on the figure, walking exactly half a step ahead of him. Lily wore a custom-tailored black suit, cut to her small figure, but without childish adornments. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her face no longer had blood, scabs, or mud, but the white scar on her forehead shone under the halogen lights, a permanent reminder of the war she had won. She walked with firm steps, ignoring the bewildered stares of the 60-year-old executives, and stopped in front of the head of the table, the chairman's seat, the seat that Robert Thorne had tried to steal. Arthur stopped his wheelchair to the side. He gave his granddaughter a slight nod. Lily sat down, adjusted her jacket cuffs, and fixed her immense dark eyes on the men in front of her. The predatory instinct of the streets had merged perfectly with the relentless blood of the Sterlings. The financial director, a bold and sweaty man, tried to break the ice with a condescending smile. Miss Lily, welcome. We have prepared some very colorful and easy-to-understand charts to explain the company's quarterly performance. Lily didn't blink. She extended her hand, and Mr. Davies handed her an electronic tablet. She slid it across the black glass towards the financial director. I don't need colorful charts, Mr. Henderson, Lily spoke. Her voice, though childlike, had an icy resonance that cut off the breath of everyone present. I need you to explain why the loss margin at the Highway 401 refinery went up 3% since Robert Thorne signed the contract with the coal suppliers in January. I reviewed the books last night. There are cost overruns in the freight. The financial director turned pale as paper. He opened his mouth to stammer an excuse, but no words came out. The other executives exchanged looks of absolute panic. They had underestimated the girl. They believed they would have a manipulable puppet, and had just realized they had a numerical monster trained by the worst of wolves in front of them. Arthur let out a hoarse laugh, interlacing his fingers in his lap, enjoying the terror in the eyes of his own employees. Answer the board chair, Henderson. And you better not lie, because if she fires you today, I will make sure you never get a job cleaning gas station bathrooms again. Lily leaned back in the immense leather chair. On the black glass table, exactly to her right, rested the steel rose, the heavy metal flower that had survived time, betrayal, and death. The girl looked through the panoramic window behind her. In the distance, the giant chimneys of sterling iron and steel spewed fire and smoke into the city sky, a sky that once crushed her mercilessly and now belonged entirely to her. She had entered the hospital like a street rat, ready to die for a promise. She had left the church crowned as queen. Lily Chen returned her predatory gaze to the sweating men at the table, rested her elbows on the glass, and interlaced her fingers. Let's begin, ordered the heiress of Toronto.